Some conversations were never meant to be recorded. This one was. Dick Schultz, University of Iowa basketball coach, ran the NCAA, and led the United States Olympic Committee. Kevin Cramton, author of Tuned, former CEO, who has led billion-dollar deals around the globe and credits Dick as his greatest mentor.
Sometimes life, you get out of tune.
If you keep your focus in the right place, and then life will become a true adventure for you.
In a world moving faster than ever, it's easy to lose rhythm. These conversations help you find it again.
The A and B students all end up working for the C students.
This is not a masterclass. This is not a playbook. It's just real talk from two men who have done it. Welcome to Tune Talks.
Welcome to Tune Talks. You know, Dick, a lot of people, when they face challenges, changes, the need to adapt, tend to either do one of two things. They either get paralyzed by the change that comes at them and don't know how to react, or they try to tough it through by themselves. And the problem with toughing it through by yourselves is life tends to be more like a marathon and not a sprint. So why don't you talk about how do you cope with the changes and challenges effectively? How do you enable yourself to be prepared as we invariably go through those changes and challenges in life?
Well, I think it starts with your mental attitude that you have and how you just go about your normal everyday tasks. And I think you have to take a look at what you're doing and understand clearly that regardless of what you're doing, there are going to be changes, there's going to be challenges, and mentally you have to be ready for that and not be upset by it. If you don't expect challenges, if you think everything is going to be a smooth road and some bumps start coming up, that's when people start pushing the panic button and making bad decisions. But if you'll have an attitude that challenges are a part of life, the Lord gives us challenges so we'll come closer to Him and we'll learn how to handle them. And so if you have that type of an attitude, you're not hanging in there by yourself. You're able to take a look and evaluate the situation, get good advice from the wisest person that ever existed, and then go from there. And be comfortable with doing that and not be afraid of them. Understand that it's something that's going to happen. You're going to have difficulties every day of your life. Some of them are going to be big, some of them are going to be small. In business, whatever you're doing, it doesn't make any difference if it's athletics or running a Fortune 500 company. You're going to have challenges every day. That's just part of life, and you have to be prepared for those and not be afraid of them, realizing that the challenges are going to make you stronger and make you more efficient.
Right. Now, you talked a little bit about the importance of people and having the right people around you that can advise you, strengthen you, encourage you. Maybe, how do you build those relationships?
Well, I think, as a CEO, most CEOs want to fill their key positions with people that have strengths that they don't have. Mm-hmm. And I think most successful CEOs operate that way. The ones that don't have an ego problem. They think they have all the answers and they don't need people to help them with it. And that's a big mistake. We have to realize we're going to need a lot of help, whether it comes from an outside advisor, a mentor, somebody we've known for a long time who's had some challenges that we're now having. People like that who can give you good advice and encourage you is very important to have. So you need to have, outside of your regular staff, you need to have some outside people who can take a look at what you're doing because they see it from a completely different perspective than you do.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things, and I've experienced this most clearly when I've been doing some of these overseas assignments over the course of my career, And it's how do you develop a point of connection? Because a lot of times you meet people and you're wondering, what do we have in common? But especially in most cultures outside of the U.S., you have to earn the right by building a relationship. So how do you connect with people? What are the key attributes of going about connecting and building relationships? How do you do that effectively?
Well, I think if they're going to be key relationships, you need to do a little research and find out as much as you can about the individual or the company or the nation that you're going to be involved with. When I was involved with the NCAA, I was involved with a lot of large corporations. And that carried me over when I ran the Olympics. You not only had to be involved with large corporations because they were major sponsors, but you had to be dealing with key people in each nation that you were going to be involved with. And because of the fact that a large percentage, over 70% of the revenue that runs the Olympics internationally comes out of the U.S., you have to be able to protect your own interests, but realize that what you do here is important there. So I think if you're dealing with individuals, and it's individuals that are involved in a power structure or head of a company, head of a nation, you do it with humility. Mm-hmm. You don't come in there like, well, I'm from the U.S., I got all the answers. You do it with humility, and you really ask searching questions to find out good information about the person you're dealing with. Let it come from them, and you will understand quickly, okay, is this a person that I can work with in a positive way, or is there an ego or a mental block here that's going to be a challenge? So you need to kind of be able to figure out the landscape, and sometimes this is when outside people can be a help. If you know somebody who's done some work in an area, and you're getting into that area for the first time, pick up the phone and call them and introduce yourself to them and ask them, would you be willing to help me with this? Can you give me some information that might be helpful? This is what I want to do. Maybe you have an idea how we can do it.
Yeah, one of the points you made really resonates with me, and it's a bit counterculture, especially to senior executives, and it's this whole concept about asking questions and listening.
Yeah.
And then after you ask good questions and you listen, you learn a lot about people, because most people are very good at talking about themselves. And then you can identify the areas. Oh, I didn't know that. And one of the things that I've always, and my youngest daughter was always freaked out, may not be the right term, but I'll use it, that I could spend half an hour with her friends. Mm-hmm. And I'd know their aspirations, I'd know about their families, I'd know what their hobbies are, because I would just ask a bunch of questions and let them talk, and then listen, and then respond and have follow-ups accordingly. And I found that was so critical, especially when you're in new environments, that you're trying to find what I call a point of connection. Where do we connect on? Sometimes it can be things that were unexpected. I met a business executive in the Ukraine a number of years ago, very wealthy guy, multi-billionaire, very different culture, and I was doing some consulting work for him. I go into his office, and I usually observe when I go into somebody's office or their home or whatever. And I observed he had wood-paneled walls and leather furniture. It looked like something out of a Winston Churchill office space. And he had art, and he had Impressionist art on his walls. And so I'm looking at that, and I had lived in France previously, and I said, well, that looks like a Monet. And I have a few prints at my house, and lo and behold, I found that ended up being an original. But when we began talking, we started to talk about art, and then we spent 45 minutes talking about art. And it was that simple point of connection around art that all of a sudden built confidence that we could build a relationship together. And then all of a sudden I'm introduced to his wife and his in-laws, and I'm invited to his house, and I'm invited to his vacation home out of that initial point of connection. And what I have found throughout my career, even how I try to apply this to my life, is I try to find in new relationships points of connection. And then this whole concept, as you mentioned, listening and asking good questions is such a great discipline to be able to accomplish that first step. Because what I have found too, and this is true throughout history, and even if you look as a Christian back to the early church, they built that point of connection, and then they built what I call relational capital. And then that gave them permission to talk about, in this case, the gospel. And I find in the case of business, building out that point of connection starts to build relational capital, which allows you to then do business together. And that relationship in many cases lasts decades and decades. Maybe why don't you talk a little bit about your experience with this whole concept called, building this relational capital, as you've kind of worked with leaders throughout the country, here in the U.S. and also around the world. How did you go about building that relational capital that built your credibility with them?
The point of interest is a very important issue and point in developing those relationships, and that's why if you can do a little bit of research ahead of time, so you kind of have a little bit of feeling, what are some of the outside interests, and asking personal questions which are not embarrassing about family or relationships or where you like to vacation. Out of that will usually come a point of interest like you found. And, one of the things that helped me was actually reading the Gospels and reading about Paul, the great missionary, when he went into a new area or a new country for the first time. He started out by talking about things that was familiar to them and established that relationship so that there was some feeling of confidence. And then he would talk about the gospel, which might be a whole new issue and strange to them. But he emphasized, first of all, starting where they were and talking about things that were important to them. And that opened the door for a lot of other things. And that's a good model to follow. The other thing that you learn, and you have to be a good listener. One of the things in consulting with CEOs and young business people, I would emphasize originally, you've got to be a good listener. Too many times in a conversation, you don't hear what the other person says because you're thinking about what you're going to say next. Right. So you need to really be listening, because that's when you'll pick up the keys that will allow you to establish relationships. And it's like going into Japan. And this goes all the way back to when I was the athletic director at the University of Virginia. And in the Ralph Sampson area, we had a trip to Japan to play in the tournament. And part of that was I was asked to visit with the CEOs that helped sponsor this. So I spent one whole day being taken from one CEO's office to the other. Well, the thing I noticed, which was very interesting, in every CEO's office, they had a big set of golf clubs in one corner. And whether they played golf or not, that was the status symbol. They had that golf club, big set of golf clubs. Most of them looked like they'd never been used. So that indicated to me that, okay, there's something about golf in China and the restrictions, the places you can play, that's important. So that became an issue that I could talk about, or I could ask them about. Hey, that's a great set of golf clubs. Right. Is it ping or what is it? And that would start some conversations and open the door. And if you have to deal with like international work where maybe you have to work through an interpreter, you have to be very careful what you say, because your words can be interpreted differently
Right.
And that's why it comes back to listening. Be sure to listen. You're going to get a lot of information just by listening. But I think it's a combination of research, taking a humble approach. I'm not a guy that knows everything. I need some answers. I might need some help from you, and finding a point of interest. Those are all things that are door openers that can create positive situations for you to move forward very effectively.
Right. One of the things I'd like to talk a little bit about is the different types of relationships, and I'll just kind of put them in three buckets. There's the deep, strong, devoted types of relationships, people that'll do anything for you. They'll be with you no matter what, thick or thin. And those are like gold because they're few and far between. And then there's what I call the fair weather friend relationships. Those are the ones in which you've developed some relationships over time. Things appear to be relatively strong, but all of a sudden, if they're tested, sometimes they don't last the test of difficult situations. And in many cases, I find those the most disappointing. And then there's the fair weather friends, and those are the more transactional kind of relationships. And most relationships are transactional. We do this every day. We meet people, and I think maybe we can talk a little bit about each of those. And the other thing I'd like to talk about as part of that is treating relationships as you would treat your financial investments. So where are you going to invest your time and effort? These most important, very few lasting and deep relationships, these ones that are kind of the fair weather relationships, and then the transactional ones. I think most people, when they look at where most of their time is spent, especially business people, all too often it's on these transactional relationships. But maybe you can talk a little bit about that, because you've dealt with these kinds of buckets naturally when you're during your career.
Yeah, you're right on track on that. You know, I had some high-profile positions as a head basketball coach in the Big Ten, as the CEO of the USOC and the CEO of the NCAA, and those are highly visible positions. So you realized, maybe you had to learn the hard way, you had a lot of people that wanted to be your friend just because of the job you had. And when you left that job, the friends left you because they wanted to attach again to whoever was in that position, because they wanted to be able to tell people that, well, I know the good close friend of the head of the NCAA or whatever. And you can figure those out pretty quick. Those are relationships and contacts that you just take. They go with the job. You have to deal with them. You don't have to spend a lot of time with them. You can't. You don't want to embarrass them. You want to be pleasant to them, but you know that there isn't going to be any lasting relationship there. And then on the other end are those relationships that you deal with, either business executives or leaders in the area you're in, that are become very lasting because you have a lot of the same interests, a lot of the same problems. You have times when that are not strictly business, where you can visit with people and get to know them personally and know something about their families. And sometimes those relations end up being very close. They end up being lifelong. But at least there'll be good, strong arrangements and business situations as long as you're still working in those areas. And then there's that relationship you say that are kind of in between. The relationship you develop because you have to do business with a person, and it's strictly business. You get to know them a little bit. You probably don't know much about their families. Outside of the business meetings, you probably don't spend much time with them, but yet they're important relationships you have to have, because they're people that you need something from them and they need something from you, and that's the relationship.
Yeah, you mentioned, and I've seen it a lot, it's this situation where you develop a relationship, you think there's some depth to it, but then you find out that that depth may have been related to the position you were in or how you could help them, but it really wasn't the deeper relationship. And I think if I kind of look at where I've kind of mistook relationships, it's been in that segment. I've understood the deep relationship, and that's the family, the long tenured friends. That's the relationship that you have with your spouse, your partner. And unfortunately, I think in life, because we have so much time to give, maybe we underinvest in those relationships and to their detriment sometimes. And then maybe we're overinvesting in these areas. And I think it takes wisdom and self-assessment and maybe a good accountability partner. Maybe we should talk a little bit about that in a second, to be able to make sure that you're making the proper investments as you kind of walk through life and walk through, be it your career or with other elements that you're going through. And I think it's especially important because as you deal with these challenges in life, the one thing you can count on is this first group, because they're going to be with you thick or thin. The other two groups, maybe not so much. Sometimes they surprise you, but not so much. So how do you make sure that you're making the proper investments from a people perspective in the right areas and not falling into the trap? Because I think as a business person, you can easily fall into the trap of transactional relationships. How do you do that? How do you make sure that you're investing wisely and hold yourself accountable to doing that?
Well, after 25 years of coaching, I found out sometimes the hard way that there are a lot of those relationships that are meaningless. If you're having a good year or a good game, everybody wants to love you, everybody wants to have something to do with you. If you have a bad season, they don't want anything to do with you. They want somebody else.
Right.
So you learn, first of all, what are the traits? What do you recognize about a relationship that will tell you that this isn't going to go anywhere? They just want a relationship because of what you do, and that's it. It takes a little bit of time, I think, to develop meaningful relationships, and you have to work at it. But you need to do some things, find out some things. Can you really trust people? Are people going to do what they say? And I've always tried to find some way of having a person say, well, I can help you with this, or I can do this for you. I'll say, okay, and then I'll watch and see if they follow through or if that was just talk. So I think doing us some things that will help you really know the depth and the purpose and the value of the relationship is there. And it might take you a little bit of time to do that, but eventually you'll end up with solid relationships that are productive. They're personal, they're trusting, and so forth. And the others, you just deal with them in a very business-like area. Okay, I'm doing business here, and what do we have to do to make this thing work? Right.
So how do you, and maybe it's because you're influenced by where you grew up in your background. I grew up in an urban environment in Detroit, and you kind of learn that there were that friend group, those great friends, they're thick or thin. You had been through a lot of different situations with them, and you trusted them, and they've proven they're trustworthy. There were others that you thought were your friends. You found out that they really weren't.
Yeah.
And so, at least for me, it's easy to have a great deal of trust for a small group of people who have proven through the test of time and through the test of of circumstance. I find it, maybe I'm a little bit from Missouri, you kind of show me, and trust is earned. Now, maybe that's, whereas my wife is the opposite. She's very trusting. So how people, and maybe you can talk about how you approach that. Is trust earned, or are you somebody that you give people upfront the benefit of the doubt and then they have to prove that they're not worthy of trust? Or is it the other way around, where, how do you look at that? 'Cause
I think I always try to look at the big picture and see, okay, what has brought this relationship together? Why am I here? Why is this important? And it probably goes back to, some of that to my childhood, growing up in a small town. It was pretty easy for me to find out quickly who my real friends were. The ones that weren't friends, or wanted to pick a fight every time you went to school or you went back, and the others were people that supported you. So to me, I found it not difficult to be able to come up and measure the value of a friendship and whether it was trustworthy or productive or not. And I guess that would come from me spending enough time with them to understand really what their interests were, and are they interested in me as an individual, or are they interested in me and what I can do for them, or what type of job I have. And for me, it was not hard to do that, but you have to ask some pretty good penetrating questions.
Now, when you're thinking about relationships and the importance they are to equipping you to be able to handle all of these challenges, sometimes chaos, that you're going to face and have to adapt and to adjust. We talked earlier about the importance of the spouse, the lifetime partner relationship, and how that's so crucial. And if you're going to make one decision right, a relationship decision right, that's the one you want to make right. You want to have right. And so discerning that is important. But as you fill out the other types of relationships that you need, there's the friend relationships. And how do you build those deep friend relationships, which are different in some cases from the mentoring relationships? Yeah. There's kind of the friend is more the peer that you hang around with, and then the mentor's the one that may be giving you wisdom. Maybe you can talk a little bit about, how do you develop these kinds of friend relationships? Because one of the issues that you face if you're as a business executive, especially if you're a CEO or in a very senior position, it's hard to have those type of transparent friend relationships with people that you're working with every day. Because sometimes you can't get the advice, or you need a level of confidentiality. So in many cases, you have to build a network of friendships beyond your direct marketplace. And then how do you go about, like I've done with you, is to have that mentoring relationship where you can, through your experience and wisdom, you can help guide somebody that's younger, less experienced. So maybe talk a little bit about those two types of groups, and how would you go about approaching building that network and capability?
Well, you mentioned the importance of a spouse, and I've found a lot of times that if I had my wife with me and we were building relationships, that she would make an observation that completely bypassed me.
Right.
And she was usually always right.
Right. Yeah,
Don't spend too much time in that relationship. She says, I don't think it's going to go anywhere. But she would see something that wasn't obvious to me. Probably because I was 20 years old when I started my first coaching job. And I had people in class that I was only about 2 years older than they were. And so I had that mentality of wanting to help them learn and understand things that I did and things that were important in life and important in business and so forth, that I've always approached most of my jobs from a teaching standpoint rather than from a management standpoint. But it is important, and you mentioned that you have to have the right relationship with your direct reports and your employees. You need to be a good listener to what they have and what their concerns are, and you need to be doing whatever you can to make them as effective as they can possibly be. But you can't develop a deep personal relationship because you have to be in charge. And if they're not doing things the right way, you have to be able to instruct them to do that. One of the things I always did with employees, I kind of put together a 100-day plan for them and say, all right, the first 100 days you're here. You get to know these people, and you need to do this and this and this. And then we'd evaluate that. And to my direct reports, I said, when you have people reporting to you and new people, understand that people many times learn more from their mistakes than they do from their successes. And you need to give people the freedom to use, if they're going to enjoy their work, you have to give them the freedom to use their skills and talents and be able to do some things and develop some things on their own. And allow them to do that, but monitor it closely so if they get off track, you can bring them back in and get them going in the same direction. But a 100-day plan works real well in getting people off to the right start, doing the right things, developing the right relationships. So the manager-employee relationship is one that you need to develop, and it needs to be a positive one, but you need to be the boss.
Yeah, there's this concept that a lot of people use. It's called servant leadership.
Yeah.
I think in many cases, the definition is usually a bit truncated because servant leadership has many of the elements that you just talked about, which is you need listening, and you need to be looking to develop people, and you need to be interacting, and you need to. But there's also an accountability piece of servant leadership. So it's not just empathy and acceptance, though that's an element of it, and usually it's good to start with that. But there also needs to be an accountability piece, and which is clear objectives, and then honest performance assessments, and continue coaching. And in some cases, it can lead to a situation in an employment environment where people cannot perform at the level that's required. And that doesn't mean you're not being a servant leader. It means you're not being a servant leader if they're surprised about it. That's when you're not. And so I think this whole concept of servant leadership is, it's kind of like, it's a full element that encompasses all of the key empathy and development aspects, but also this whole thing about accountability. And doing that is easier said than done, because most people are either on the empathy side, but maybe not as strong on the accountability side. And sometimes people are great on the accountability side and not great on the empathy side. So the challenge here is, how do you encompass all of that in a holistic way, which I think can lead to a very successful organization where people feel that because everybody, and this is universal, every place I've been, and it translates slightly different in each of these geographies and cultures. But at the end of the day, everybody wants to be loved and respected. Be it in the marketplace, be it in the relationships you have, everybody wants that and desires of that. And so this whole concept of servant leadership. How do you do that in a respectful way? But at the end of the day, there is an accountability piece. Maybe you can talk a little bit about.
When I left coaching, everywhere I went, there was somebody on the staff that wanted the job that I got. And one of the first conversations I had was with them. Or I said, I know that I have a job that you hope that you would get, and I'm sorry you didn't get that job. But if you can be loyal and work well with me, you're welcome to stay and be part of the organization, and I'll do everything I can to help you progress to the point where if you want to be a CEO, you can do that. But then if you don't think that's something you can do, then I'll help you find a job where you can feel comfortable in. And in most cases, that person stayed with the organization as long as I was there.
Right.
And that's one angle of servant leadership. I think, to me, servant leadership is doing whatever you can to help people improve their skills and develop fully. Don't leave their families out. If they have young children, their families, that you have to help them understand how important it is for them to spend time with their children and their families, that their job isn't the most important thing they have. Their family is the long-lasting element in their lives they need to develop and work around, but it still had some guidelines for performance that you didn't yield on necessarily.
Right.
So servant leadership is a good title, but you have to approach it from the right angle, because you can't be the kind of leader that people think they can take advantage of, and they can do jobs partially and not completely. You have to have a setup so that you know exactly who's productive and who isn't productive, and I had to make changes in key areas almost everywhere I went, but it was all on the basis of non-performance.
Right. What do you think of this concept you hear of having your own personal board of directors, where you should have people that may be professional support, people that may help you, develop your skill set. Maybe you should have people that can support you spiritually and help you develop in that. So have you ever thought about that concept, and have you ever embraced that for you personally, of having these kinds of groups of advisors in some
Well,
of them
I've never thought about it as a board of directors, but I've always felt it's important that you need to have a group of people or a friend or somebody that you can share things with, that you have complete confidence in, that it's going to be a conversation of the two of you. It isn't going to go any farther. It isn't even going to go to spouses. It's going to be something you're talking about. And I always look for people, first of all, that could be a good confidential friend like that, where if I had challenges, I could discuss it with them and get their reaction to it and the feedback to them. But I've also felt like there were times when I needed to find some outside help, that I could get some advice on certain issues on that maybe I didn't have the experience in that, but I needed to understand the whole situation clearer, and I would look for people that could do that. I think if you get yourself to the point where you think you can do everything by yourself, make all the decisions on your own, you're going to be in trouble.
Isn't that one of the key learnings? And I think if you're going to also be able to navigate and adapt to all the changes that you're going to face, if you think you're going to do it all by yourself, you're going to be Atlas holding up the world. The problem is your arms are going to become weary, and sooner versus later. And so having those key support groups are really the key enablers to help you then navigate that, be it wisdom or sometimes just encouragement.
Yeah. In every job as a CEO or a manager, if you're in that work very long, you're going to find yourself in times where you just get exhausted sometimes and you feel overwhelmed because of everything that's going on around you. And that's when you need to step away to some people that can provide you good advice and good counsel that you can trust and count on. And if nothing more, just to air out, let you air yourself out to them,
Right.
Just find a good listener can hear everything you have to say. He doesn't have to give you any advice, just has to give you a chance. One of the interesting things I found in working with a CEO forum, and I was working with about 60 CEOs around the country. We'd go into the office and I'd meet with them at least twice a year. And depending on how many there were in the city or an area, it might be more than that. But I found after the niceties were over and after we had developed a level of trust, all of a sudden that CEO just opened up and started talking about everything. And and maybe there was a key issue that he had. I said, well, let's talk about it. Tell me about it. And as he would go through describing to me what he wanted to do, the challenge he found, sometimes I could just ask one or two key questions, and all of a sudden it was like a light bulb turned on.
Right.
Oh, I know how to do that now. He had never shared it with it was a concept, an idea he was playing with. He hadn't shared that with his top reports, and he just needed to talk to somebody about it and air it out and get the reaction.
Sure.
And sometimes just one or two questions about what he was doing would kind of clear the air. And that happened in almost every CEO I worked with.
So if you're in an executive position, if you're a coach, if you're in any position of leadership, how do you go about building credibility and with your team? How do you go about doing that? What are the key elements of building that kind of credibility that your team's going to follow you, your leadership?
Well, I use the word trust quite a bit. There has to be a good level of trust between coach and athlete, against CEO and staff and so forth. And you need to know what the challenges are that they have, both like the athlete, both physical and mental challenges. And you need to be able to understand that. And I mentioned this to you one other time. It's like, especially in the sport of basketball, the 5 most talented athletes you have doesn't necessarily make the best team.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have somebody who really likes to play defense and can be a defensive specialist. You need somebody who's going to be a big rebounder for you, and you need a ball handler and so forth. And putting that combination together into something that works smoothly may not be the 5 most talented people you have. And you have athletes with great skills, and many of them really work hard and push themselves. They want to be as good as they can possibly be. And then you'll have some who have those skills. They'll work hard each practice to a certain point, and then they stop at that point, and they never get any farther.
Mm-hmm.
And then you'll have a couple of guys that were good high school players, average college players, but they would work their tails off to improve their skills, and they ended up being very productive athletes for you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's measuring not just talent, but it's measuring dependability and desire and people who are able to work hard. And I find that carried right over into organizations that I worked with.
Mm-hmm.
I had the same kind of people there, and some of them you needed to push and prod, and others were up here on top, you kind of had to hold them back. Otherwise, they would get too far ahead of everybody else. So it's getting to know people well and understand what their capabilities are and what their work experiences and their levels of tenacity are, and commitment to what they're doing. If you have somebody in your organization that's just there to pick up a paycheck, they're not going to last very long.
Right. So when you're in these leadership roles, everybody's looking at you. Yeah. Everybody's watching you. They're not only watching what you do, what you say, your body language. So how do you make sure, and use the term, self-aware, that you become self-aware of how you're being viewed? Because a lot of times when you're in these positions, you're trying to do, and you may not fully understand how you said something, what you said, what your body language was. How do you make yourself or be cognizant of this whole concept of self-awareness in the various ways that you impact people? Because I think everybody's looking at you in these key roles.
You need to have a way of getting feedback. When I went to the NCAA, I was taking over an organization that one individual had run for 35 years. And it was pretty much, this is the way it is, and you see it, it's done this way. After my first year at the NCAA, I asked my direct reports, and it stunned them. I said, tell me 5 things I did this year that you want me to continue to do next year, and tell me 5 things I did this year that you don't think I ought to do. And they just looked at you, they just couldn't believe I would ask them to do that. And it took them a while to get used to that. I had to let them get over the shock that somebody would really ask them to, you'd really ask somebody to evaluate what you're doing. But then it ended up being very valuable, and they felt comfortable talking to me about things that they liked, the things they thought was a waste of time, or that maybe I'll adjust or change a little bit. So I think as a leader, you have to come up with ways of, if your organization is not going to evaluate you, like a board of trustees or whatever it might be, then you need to find a way of getting good, honest evaluation.
Now, how do you sift through that kind of feedback? Because sometimes the feedback may be genuine and constructive, and then sometimes it may be just not happy with you, don't like you, or maybe you got the job I wanted, and so the feedback may not necessarily be all that constructive. How do you sift through that? Because you're going to get, when you ask like that, you're going to get feedback. What I found, the good and the bad, the good news is you're going to get feedback. The bad news is you're going to get feedback.
Yeah.
And so there's an expectation, if someone gives you feedback, that you're going to take it in and respond in kind.
If it's anonymous feedback, you're going to get certain kinds of feedback. And if it's not anonymous, you're going to get a different kind of feedback. So basically, if it was anonymous, if I had a staff member that I could really trust, that I could say, tell me what you think is valid and what's invalid about this. And if it wasn't anonymous, I'd ask them then, okay, you don't want me, you don't like that I do this, you want to change that. Tell me why. And what changes would you make, and bring them, then you would know if it was genuine or if it wasn't. I can imagine that's a difficult challenge for a lot of leaders. It was not a difficult challenge for me.
So when you're going back to the team concept, so on a team, you can play different roles, and you may play different roles during a gestation. So you may be a rookie, and then you're a contributor, and then maybe one day you're the star. Similarly, you may play those roles in relationships. You may be the one that's the student and being the one that is taking things in and really receiving training and knowledge and development. And then you may get to the point where like you're the friend, and the exchange is back and forth, and maybe it's equal. And then maybe you get to the day where all of a sudden you're in the mentor relationship. Have you seen that over the course of your career, your life, where you kind of played different roles as the evolution of, be it a career or a position or life in general, where you started out as a learner and maybe hopefully you're a lifelong learner, but you were primarily a learner, and then all of a sudden you reach a point where you feel that you want to give back and you're a mentor?
It changes early on in your career as you're moving into a new position. There's always a time of adjustment, a time when you need feedback, and you need to figure out the best way to get good, honest feedback. And then you get to the point where you pretty much covered the ballpark, and you have people comfortable, and you're getting the feedback you want without having to go out and ask and push people for it. And with teams, one of the important things of a team captain, and something I'd always have them say, one of your big responsibilities is to, if team members have a concern, you bring that concern to me, and I know about it. And I expressed up front to the team that this is one of the responsibilities your captains are going to have. So when you elect a captain, be sure you're electing somebody that you can trust, that's going to be responsible, is going to act in your best interest.
Right.
And so that part ended up working pretty well.
Do you think you naturally evolve in these different roles, or is sometimes maybe you're better in some of those roles, and then sometimes you may not be better in others? For example, you may be great at being a teammate, but maybe you're just not great at being a mentor type role, which takes on a different level of responsibility, and in some cases accountability, than just being a person that is a peer. And then when you're a learner, responsibilities you're trying to take in and you're really receiving, where you're in the mentorship role, you're really giving. So all of a sudden that relationship changes. Do you think that people either evolve and take on those roles naturally, or do you think people, just because of personalities or training or capabilities, are maybe good in some of those roles and not too good in others?
It's kind of potluck.
Okay.
If you don't want to be a mentor and you're coaching the team or you're running a business, you're eventually going to find out there's going to be some people you're going to have to mentor, whether you like it or not. And then you have people who are managers who their big thing is mentoring people. They want to mentor people. They want to spend time with them. And I think as a CEO, you have to determine what's the best way, what's going to make me be more productive. How do I take care of all the responsibilities I have and be responsible to the employees and so forth. And I think that's something that you develop over time, so you have a good feel about when you need to be mentoring somebody and when you don't, when you need to make changes or not. Do we have to reevaluate a lot of things that we're doing? I always kind of, with young business people, use the example of what's good leadership and what's poor leadership. I said you might have a CEO or a leader who has this idea, and he just puts that out to his direct reports, and they don't have any input in it. And after 30 days or 60 days evaluating, it's not working the way it should, but he keeps saying, we're going to do this. And he keeps going with it, and it ends up costing him a lot of money and a lot of time, and it's a failure. And the good CEO starts out the same way, and he has this idea, but after 30 or 60 days, he said, hey, we're just wasting a lot of time. And he gets feedback from his employees to what they're doing, and he cuts it off. He doesn't bother him that his idea that didn't work. That's just the way you do business. You'll have things that are good and things that are bad. So in management, you can't let your ego get in the way. It can create lots of problems.
Right.
And it's something if you have that strong, dynamic personality that I'm going to get things done regardless of what it costs, that might work sometimes. Most of the time it's going to fail.
Right.